Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads. Sorry, I got a computer mouse here. Today, we are continuing in our story, Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. This is part 4, section 10. And in the last video, Ed Skizens was at the baseball field and saw himself being the pitcher. And then he went, I'm going to move you in a little bit. He went on this great big speech about one word, baseball. So that's kind of where we left it. And one word within us, da 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 da. That's where we left it. He's still kind of in his little speech. When you speak the word, something will begin to happen. We underestimate the power of the word. He's kind of equating it to God or Jesus, so I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's how he feels about it, apparently. We underestimate all that it can accomplish. When you go out there and speak the word of baseball, the word of baseball is spirit and it is life. I've read the word, I've played it, I've digested it. It's in there. When you speak, there is going to be a change in those around you. That is the living word of baseball. Now, spiritually speaking, I would put a different word in there for baseball, but for Eddie Skizens, it's baseball. The players shuffle their feet. Some move away a little, but then it is as if Eddie's voice pulls them back in. As I look at you, I know that there are many who are troubled, anxious, worried, insecure. What is the cure? Is it to be found in doctors and pills and medicines? No. The answer is in the word. And baseball is the word. We must tell everyone we meet the true meaning of the word of baseball. And if we do, those who speak it will be changed by the power of that living word. Can you say the word? Baseball, we chant, and our voices rise toward Eddie Skizens like doves on the warm Iowa wind. The word is what? Baseball is what? Baseball. Oh my gosh. Praise the name of baseball. The word will set captives free. The word will open the eyes of the blind. The word will raise the dead. Have you the word of baseball living inside you? Has the word of baseball become part of you? Do you live it, play it, digest it forever? Let an old man tell you to make the word of baseball your life. Walk into the world and speak of baseball. Let the word flow through you like water so that it may quicken the thirst of your fellow man. Whew, that is quite a speech. Late that night, I am sitting in the dark at the kitchen table when Eddie joins me. He wears a nightgown that looks as if it might have been made from a Chicago Cubs road uniform. You're afraid to talk to him, he says, pulling out a chair, leaning heavily on his serpent head cane as he takes a seat. I know immediately that he is talking about the catcher. I nod to Eddie that I do indeed know who he is referring to, and that I am indeed afraid. I heard somebody say once, success is getting what you want, but happiness is wanting what you get. He lays one of his large hands on the oil-covered cloth table before me. Oil-cloth covered table before me. You saw what happened to me. I got what I wanted. but it wasn't what I needed to make me happy. But you still believe, Eddie finishes the sentence for me. It takes more than an infinite ERA to shake my faith. He chuckles, not unhappily. It's just that the implications are so immense, I say. They don't have to be, Ray. I know I'm sounding like I'm trying to be the wise old rascal, and I am supposed to. But you were so excited when you told us about the idea of your catcher appearing. Since he has, all you do is sneak around your own ballpark looking at your shoes. Just go up to the man and tell him you admire the way he catches a game of baseball. Outside the window, the moon is whitish and hangs like a sickle of ice. Share what you've got in common, he goes on. Talk about the small ballparks he took you to as a kid, where kids played with mongrel dogs under the bleachers and farmers scuffed their boots on the boards and kept one eye on the sky. Tell him your name is Ray and introduce him to Karen for her sake, not his. Because someday she'll be old enough to understand and appreciate what you did. The right chemistry will be there. It can't help but be. You both love the game. Make that your common ground, and nothing else will matter. Eddie smiles at me, the cool summer moon reflected in his pale eyes. But how can I do it and not give away what I know? I think of a picture of a group of baseball players standing in front of the bleachers in a small town in Montana. It was taken by my mother with an old-fashioned Kodak box camera made of heavy black cardboard. The ball players in the picture are all but indistinguishable, but my mother used to point one out and say, "That's Daddy." And if I looked closely, I could see the square cut of his jaw, could recognize him by the way he liked to stand with his left hand resting on his hip. Of course you can do it, says Eddie. You're awfully good at keeping secrets. I should know. But I hardly hear him, for I am thinking of the man I knew in Montana, John Martin Duffy Kinsella, a name as Irish as shamrocks, a name that derives from the word peninsula and was until the mid-1800s, O Kinsella. He was an affectionate, sentimental man who sang songs about the wearing of the green and about the patriot he was named for, John Martin Duffy. Of course you can do it, Eddie says again. You have to do it. How many people get a chance to do it? I've got a sneaking feeling that the magic has been here all the time, and that it was what drew me out here from Chicago, not the teaching job. But I was like a key with one tooth missing. I didn't have what it took to let the genie out of the bottle. Maybe that's why I'd stopped you on the street. Spikes of moonlight decorate the table as Eddie reaches across and clasps my hand. I'm counting on you, and in more ways than one. I guess you know that there weren't any baseball boys. That was all malarkey, like everything else I told you. I understand, I say, and I hope I do. Once you meet him, it will be like the last inning of a perfectly played ball game. You'll pray for extra innings so you'll never have to go home. You'll see. He rises and makes his way to the stairs and seems to float upward into the moon-spangled darkness. I sit alone, recalling a conversation I had with Salinger. That catcher's good. Look at how fast he comes up with the ball, Jerry said one day. He has an arm like a catapult. Is he really? He is. Does he know? Of course not. He's a young man from North Dakota named Johnny Kinsella, who has just broken into the majors with the White Sox. I'm not even a glint in his eye. And you can't tell him? That's why I haven't even approached him. I'm afraid I'll give myself away. It must be painful for you. You're a master of understatement. But if you were him, would you want to know what I know? No mere apple could equal the temptation. But no, I wouldn't. It would destroy anyone to know his own future. I know I have to put what I'm aware of in perspective. He's young and rugged and unafraid and full of hope. It should be enough for me to see him doing what he loves best. Salinger nodded his head in agreement, but I saw him years later, worn down by life. Think about it. I'm getting to see something very special. It was afternoon when Salinger decided to ask Eddie if he wanted to play hearts. When he got no answer to his knock, he opened the door and found Eddie dead. Eddie must have had a premonition, for he had changed into his Chicago Cub uniform. His cap, glove, and brand new spikes were laid out beside the bed. It is more difficult than you might expect to dispose of a dead body, especially when you find you know virtually nothing about the deceased. We knew that Eddie's daughters were scattered about America in Seattle, Boston, and Phoenix, but we did not know how to contact even one of them. Some kind man from the Johnson County Sheriff's Department finally took charge of the situation after asking me a number of pointed questions about why I had the body of a 91-year-old stranger in a Cub uniform in my guest bedroom. Eddie's body ended up at the Beckman Jones Funeral Home in Iowa City. His daughters were notified by the proper authorities, and each dutifully booked passage to Cedar Rapids Airport. I could picture the flight paths of these airplanes sectioning a map of the United States into triangles and rectangles as they rushed home. Annie and I make a duty call on them at Eddie's tiny apartment, where the three of them have holed up on arrival. They are middle-aged women, severe as suffragettes, who inspect us critically and ask our religious affiliation. I tell them only that Eddie was homesick for the farm and that we had invited him to spend a few days with us. They sniff disdainfully each time their eyes land on one of Eddie's baseball artifacts that line the mantel and windowsill, or when they see one of the Chicago Cubs programs that are thumbtacked to the wall of both the living room and the bedroom. I don't mention my interest in baseball, but tactfully inform them of Eddie's desire to be buried in his Cub uniform. I know, replies the one who is wearing a crocheted hat. He wrote each of us at least a dozen times to tell us that. She scowls and sniffs. The coffin will be closed, of course, says a second daughter whose hair looks as if it has been stained with blueberries. The following day, the phone rings. Mr. Kinsella? Yes. This is Gladys Vickery speaking. Yes. I used to be Gladys Skizens. We met briefly yesterday. We did. Well, I'm calling from the lawyer's office. My father added a strange clause to his will just last week, in fact. I think it is preposterous, but Mr. Embry says I should at least check with you. Go on. At the end of his will, he added, I want to be buried in Ray Kinsella's cornfield. Just like that. No explanation or anything. No one else would understand. I said, do you understand? We had a mutual interest in baseball. Oh, she says in a knowing voice. Did he fill you full of his awful stories? You know, he never played for. It's all right. I can afford the space. Your father can be buried here. I'll have Mr. Embry draw up a contract. We'll pay you the same as the cemetery. That won't be necessary. There was a long silence. Then I hear her aside to the lawyer. He says he wants him buried there, but must be as crazy as Daddy was. The daughters decide not to attend the burial. I am able to convince them that they would not want to muddy their shoes in the cornfield. The hearse that delivers Eddie's coffin is painted in apple green with black stripes along the sides like swaths of ribbon. The two attendants, who could easily serve as mannequins in a formal shop window, are anxious to see the body planted. We let them wheel the coffin as far as the baseball stadium. Their eyes race back and forth in gloomy faces, and it takes great self-control for them not to ask questions. They place the coffin on the ground beside the grave. Jerry and I insist that we will lower the coffin into the grave at a more appropriate time. The dolorous attendants, who speak like English butlers with Midwestern voices, reluctantly agree. We are not dishonoring Eddie's last request. Yesterday, as Salinger and I headed for the cornfield behind left field, shovels in hand, we saw, to our surprise, that the baseball players were holding a workout. We'd like to be a part of it, Shoeless Joe Jackson says, with great sincerity. He loved the game as much as anyone can, and we'd like to pay our last respects. But out there, you can't, I said, nodding toward the spaces beyond the fence where the corn rustles greenly. Joe nodded. The others were behind Joe, silent and subdued. What happens to you when you go through that door? It's not 50 yards to the gravesite, I said, but Joe and the others only smiled sadly, enigmatically. If you can't come to the grave, then suppose we bring the grave to you, said Jerry. That would be most considerate, said Joe Jackson, and the others nodded solemnly. I looked at the blade of my nearly new shovel, the black paint barely scratched, and I thought of the labor, the love, the passion I'd expended to make the field. I looked in horror at Salinger for suggesting such a thing, but he looked back at me with a level brown gaze, and the players stared silently at me, and Shoeless Joe walked wordlessly across the outfield, slowly, his magnificent bat, Black Betsy, wavering in front of him like a metal detector, like a divining rod. And the place where he stopped was deep in left field, where the grass is most lush, the grain of it like expensive carpet, the color dark and luxurious as ripe limes. The wind whispered through the empty stands, and heavy clouds roiled across the sky. Salinger had lowered the stars and stripes and the Iowa flag to half-mast on the flagpole in center field. Both flags snapped crisply in the breeze. All right, I sighed resignedly. And as I did, I felt the great tenderness toward Eddie Skizzens. He may have exaggerated a little, but he did it with class. I hope people will be able to say the same about me after I'm gone. But let me make the first cut, I said, and placed the shovel on the ground and stepped down on it. I felt it slip into the earth easily, as if it were spading chocolate pudding. Now, as the varnished coffin sits beside the grave, I recall the service that afternoon in Iowa City, a closed coffin service in which a minister from a church Eddie had never attended ranted and chanted and raged over his coffin. His words were, I suppose, in some way a comfort for the daughters who had engaged him, but he said not one thing about Eddie, except that he had lived a long life and produced 3 fine, God-fearing daughters. Well, old buddy, I think, whatever happens, whether you stay buried here beneath a baseball field or whether it all gets leveled out and planted in corn, there's no finer resting place in the world. I think we should open the coffin, I say aloud. No one objects. It takes Salinger and me a while to find the hidden snaps with which the undertakers had fastened it. Inside, Eddie, capless, his white mane trimmed and hairsprayed into place, the cosmetics of the dead making him look younger than I have ever seen him, lies resplendent in his Chicago Cub uniform. His cap rests on his folded hands, his feet are encased by his new cleats, his glove lies at his side below his right hand. One of the daughters must have remembered that he was left-handed. And that's where we're going to stop. The funeral section is not quite over, but that's kind of where our time is for stopping. Well, I think we kind of all saw that coming when Eddie saw Kid Skizzins out on the baseball field. Interesting story. People and personalities and relationships and baseball. All right, you guys, we are almost done. Oh yeah, look, very close to the end of the book. Not much further. I hope you continue to stay with me and enjoy the chapters or sections as we finish this book. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.